Let's talk about water and why water is so important in Colorado. This is going to be a fairly long video, as you probably have noticed. So, sit back, relax. I'm going to pause things as we kind of go in this video that's attached here to give it a little more information. But let's get things started. Um, First, I want you to know a little bit about water rights of Colorado. And the reason we're talking about this is we want to look at how water impacts us locally, and then we're going to sort of branch off from that and look at how it impacts people internationally. Just a couple things, and I'll kind of fill you in on some really important things to note down in your notes here. Back in the 1840s and between 1840 and 1870, that's kind of when early settlers were here. Well, very soon after they were here, they realized how important water was. And if you've been here for any length of time in the summer, you know how dry it can be. So in 1861, and this is an important date that you write down, that was the first law that was passed. And it was called Territorial Water Management Law. It just says just and equitable. Basically, that means that if that water needs to be apportioned in a just and equitable manner. And it was a very vague law. It didn't really say a lot, but it just showed the significance of water in Colorado really at a very early time frame. And then in 1878 was this prior appropriation, which basically said if you were here first and you had first use of it, then you had first rights for that water. So the first to be able to get there had first rights. Then the problem was they had no way to measure water. So in 1915, they developed this thing called the partial flume. You'll learn more about that in the video. 1969, that's when they refined that law. So it was 100 years later, from 1861 to 69, and that's when they created the Water Rights Determination Administration Act of 1969. So you'll learn a little bit more about that in the video. And then just as we move on from there, we had some pretty significant droughts in 2002, 2012. And that showed really the importance of having this water law, because it really affects people's farmlands and their livelihood if they don't have access to water. So make sure that you do note that this is the first year, 1861, that we had the first law in place. So now we're going to watch this video. It's like 17 minutes long. So it's long. I'm going to pause it at a couple different points just to give you some time to write a couple things down. But beyond that, I just want you to listen in and gather in sort of the history of the place that you live and learn a little bit more about why water is so important in our area.
Without the Poudre, you don't have life in the area.
He used the river water to irrigate the farm.
In my time, it was my lifestyle that I could come down here and play as a kid.
The Poudre River is absolutely the lifeblood of northern Colorado.
From its headwaters at 12,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains, the Cache la Poudre River snakes its way through rugged mountain terrain to the fertile plains of northern Colorado, turning a once desolate expanse into a thriving region of agriculture and urban activity. Waters from the Cache la Poudre feed the farmland that once dominated this area along the river, and now help quench the thirst of a growing population. It's a small river, but it holds a rich heritage dating back many centuries. It played a key role in the development of water law in the U.S., the development of modern water delivery systems, and it was the source of a bitter dispute between the communities of Fort Collins and Greeley that nearly erupted into war.
Did you catch that? Between Fort Collins and Greeley. Probably should know that.
This is the Cache la Poudre River National Heritage Area. The upper stretches of the Cache la Poudre River that originate at Poudre Lake, high on Rocky Mountain National Park, have been set aside by Congress as part of the Wild and Scenic System of Rivers to preserve its free flow and natural beauty. But just miles below, peacefully traversing a 40-mile stretch of northern Colorado plains, the river lies at the heart of decades of legal and political struggle. These struggles, however, led to the development of today's water law of the western United States and to advances in water delivery systems now found throughout the country. This section of the Cache la Poudre River, known as the Working Cache, begins in Larimer County at the eastern edge of the Roosevelt National Forest and ends at the confluence with the South Platte River east of Greeley, and is responsible for the settlement, agriculture, and growth of the region. The river's name dates back to the early French trappers that first settled the river basin in the 1840s. According to legend, a group in the area was caught in a heavy snowstorm. To lighten their load, they buried their gunpowder near the river, and from that point on, called the river Hide the Powder, or in French, Cache la Poudre. While the hunters and trappers along the river had little need for agriculture, the 1859 discovery of gold in Denver sparked a dramatic influx of settlers. Farmers took to the fertile soils along the Cache la Poudre and soon began digging the first primitive irrigation ditches in the 1860s.
I think about how they were able to come in here and take the first ditches off of the river, which were not very far from the Taylor and Gill, which was one of the first. You know, they had to do a lot of work, and they took that water for miles and miles.
These first efforts at controlling the water resulted in the first water management law passed by the territorial legislature in 1861. The law authorized local communities to appoint commissioners who were to apportion water in a just and equitable proportion. The vague law stood until irrigation methods improved and demand for water surpassed the river's supply.
Did you get that? 1861, first Colorado water law.
But the primitive ditches proved vital to the growing river basin. Though short and simple, the early irrigation methods watered crops of corn, beans, alfalfa, potatoes, beets, and more. Even today, the ditches continue to provide irrigation vital to the farms in the area.
All of our ditches were, of course, were not cement ditches, and we had to scoop those out or shovel them out every spring so that we got all the weeds and trash and everything out of them so we would have a free run of water. And so there was always a big thing in the spring is we had to shovel ditch. There was a real science to that, of turning your shovel, filing your shovel just right, having it the edge just sharp enough, and then approaching the side of the ditch and scouring it. So it was, and this was a skill that was taught to you, and you did it right, and then it made it go a lot easier.
In 1870, the Union Colony was settled near the confluence of the Cache la Poudre and the South Platte, later to become the town of Greeley. This farming community quickly changed the nature and scale of irrigation in northeast Colorado by building 2 canal-sized cooperative ditches, serving an unprecedented number of farmers, as well as the needs of the growing municipality. These were called the Greeley No. 2 and No. 3. The colony's membership fees funded the ditches, and all male residents of an eligible age were enlisted to help in their construction. This irrigation has gone on to serve the family farming community for generations.
People did not farm very big or very large farms because they simply couldn't do that many acres when you have to do it all by hand.
Further upstream from the Union Colony, another community was established along the Cache la Poudre in 1873.
So Greeley was built first. They are downriver. Then Fort Collins was built, and they're upriver, so the water flows through Fort Collins first. So do they have right to the water? Or does Greeley have right to the water because Greeley was a town in existence first? If Fort Collins uses all the water, there's no more water for Greeley. Problem?
Called the Fort Collins Agricultural Colony. Soon, the Lake Canal was built, a large ditch that diverted water to irrigate the new Fort Collins farmland. The following year brought drought to the river basin. Water levels in the river lowered, and the downstream Union Colony saw most of its water being diverted to Fort Collins farmers. Tempers flared as the summer wore on. Finally, to avert an all-out water war, representatives from the 2 communities met at the Eaton School near Windsor in July of 1874 to settle the conflict. Union colonists demanded recognition of their 1870 prior claim to water. Fort Collins farmers wanted a water commissioner to divide water according to the greatest need. Eventually, a settlement was reached. Fort Collins agreed to reduce water use to allow more water to flow to Greeley. Heavy rains eased the drought and temporarily diffused the situation. The issues raised during the conflict sowed the seeds of what would become the foundation of Colorado water law. It took more conflicts along the Cache la Poudre and other Colorado waterways for the doctrine to take root. The next major standoff involved future Colorado Governor Benjamin Eaton and his Larimer and Weld Canal, located upstream from both Greeley and Fort Collins. As construction began in 1878 on Eaton's massive ditch, downstream communities quickly realized the potential of the canal to divert the entire river. Farmers looked to the newly formed state of Colorado for laws to define and protect property rights. The resulting legislation gave shape to the prior appropriation doctrine that still serves as a foundation for today's Colorado water law. In 1876, the Cache la Poudre River Basin saw the construction of the area's first water storage structure.
There are numerous lakes and reservoirs here that were built by the people that had the foresight to see what was going on. So when we run out of this snow melt now, we go to what we call a reservoir water, and this is the water that is stored, and this takes us through the rest of the season, basically in through September.
Did you catch that? These super smart farmer engineers decided to build these giant reservoirs to catch all the snow melt, because how else are they going to get water in the summer? That's why we can grow stuff and have farms here in Colorado. The next time you climb up onto the Flatirons near Boulder, I want you to look out over the plains and count how many reservoirs you can see that catch all of that snow melt, which prevents flooding. It captures all of that water. I think I've counted at least a dozen the last time I was up there.
By the close of the 19th century, there were nearly 40 reservoirs in the Cache la Poudre water system. At the same time, communities in the river basin joined forces and went to the mountains for more water. With great difficulty in the harsh terrain and high altitude along the Continental Divide, a series of trans-mountain diversions were constructed. As water management in the region became more and more complex, Larimer and Weld County's agricultural economy became a leading source of growth in the state. There were also technological advances that contributed to agricultural progress around the world, including one device called the partial flume. Without a way to accurately measure water flows, equitable regulation of water usage was nearly impossible, until research along the Cache la Poudre produced the very technology that was needed. Professor Ralph Parshall of the Colorado Agricultural College, now known as Colorado State University, developed a revolutionary flume for measuring water. For the first time, agriculturists everywhere had a simple, inexpensive, and efficient method to precisely measure the flow of water. Colorado's growing economy in the first half of the 20th century was fueled in large part by the Cache la Poudre Basin's burgeoning sugar beet industry and other economic developments resulting from the boom. In the winter, the river produced a different kind of cash crop.
My other granddad on my mother's side, they used to live up the Poudre in the 20s, and he had a Model T that he'd taken the rear wheels off and put saw blades on it. And then he'd hook a team to them, and he'd back the old Model T out in the river and then hook the team to it and start it up, and it'd cut the ice and the horses would pull it across. Then they could chop that ice up and bring it down to the ice house in Fort Collins.
In the latter part of the 20th century, populations in the river basin dramatically increased, and the agricultural way of life that had prevailed for generations began to give way to urban development.
As the urban encroachment came in, the dogs become a big problem for the sheep, so we kind of had to get out of that business. There's very little left here anymore.
Today, homes and shopping centers fill the landscape where farms fed by the river once thrived. City dwellers and recreational users now share the bounty of the Cache la Poudre as waters continue to flow freely through the region the way they did over a century ago.
I do kind of hope that the people of today would be as appreciative of the next generations as our forefathers were.
It was an innovative spirit that spurred the building of the region's water delivery system, and it was community spirit that helped develop the water law now used throughout the West. That first dispute between the Union Colony and Fort Collins set the groundwork for the basic system of prior appropriation based on the simple concept of first in time, first in right.
The first person that went to water court and got a decree, that's the senior water right. The people that came in behind him and got water court decrees then become junior to him.
So to be clear, the people who have first rights to the water are the people who have first claim on the water.
This doctrine, along with concepts of beneficial use, abandonment, rights of reservoir users, trans-basin diversions, and interstate issues, all germinated along the fertile banks of this small but historic river.
I think it's important that the world remembers who built all the diversions and why the river has made this area as lush as it is. If you travel, even the Greeley area or the Wellington area, Timnath, every place you see trees, there's a part of the river.
The Cache la Poudre National Heritage Area is a living monument to a river that made northern Colorado's Weld and Larimer counties what they are today.
I think my ancestors would, and my great-grandfather particularly, would be pleased that I was able to carry on the work and the development of this river and the telling of the story.
As far as the Poudre River is concerned, you know, we can't hardly emphasize enough what this river has done. We simply would not have agriculture here without the Poudre River.
So that's what's gave us our landscape, that's what's give us our way of life.
And I want to end with this. If you have a desire to be involved with water and water quality, but you're not really even thinking civil engineering, there are a lot of different fields that are involved in water in general. You know, things along architectural structure, computer engineering, developing the systems, chemical engineering for testing, mechanical engineering, developing sort of the structures that allow water to pass through. So the field of water is really in a lot of different engineering fields. The topic of water is in a lot of engineering fields. And water resources and environmental engineering is really just one of them. So just to kind of give you an idea of if water quality is something that you're passionate about, there's a lot of different engineering fields that will touch on water.